This is literally the second time I'm recording this because the first time the footage got messed up, so we're doing this again. Anyway, hi. It's been, what, like 6+ months since my last reading vlog? So I'm here to give an update on everything I read from the last part of 2025 until this month, which is March 2026. If you don't know me, hi, I'm Nadia. I talk about public health and pop culture, and you may have noticed anytime I talk about books on this channel, I try to link to the book in the description, either from the publisher or from bookshop.org. Bookshop is a website that takes the proceeds from sales and distributes it in a pool to independent bookstores around the country. You may have seen on my Instagram that you can buy some of the books on my bookshop with a discount now through April 1st. You can get 15% off using the code BSO15. Check out the links in the description to see which books are eligible for the discount. And so without further ado, let's get started on today's reviews. Starting off strong, we have an Emily Henry double feature. I wanted to read People We Meet on Vacation because the movie was coming out in January, and if you've been here before, you know I am a Hunger Games fan, and Tom Blythe, who was in The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, was playing the lead in People We Meet on Vacation, so I was excited to see him. But I requested the book at the library and I wasn't going to get it for a while, so in the meantime I ended up reading Great Big Beautiful Life. Great Big Beautiful Life is about two writers, Alice and Hayden, who are sort of competing to write the biography for Margaret Ives, who was born into this big media mogul family and was sort of infamous for being a party girl and being in the mix of a lot of situations. But she ended up disappearing, and so there was this lingering question of what happened to her, where was her life looking like now? And so Margaret invites both Alice and Hayden to her sort of remote home out in Georgia, and they spend time like getting to know her, and they're essentially trying to figure out what's going on with her life, what happened to her, and it eventually becomes clear that she has been lying to them throughout the courses of these interviews. And of course, this is an Emily Henry book, so this is a romance. Alice and Hayden are attracted to each other pretty early on, but they sort of push each other away because they don't want to resent each other if one of them gets a job and the other doesn't. At the same time, they both realize that Margaret is lying about a lot of things, and so they kind of try to work together to figure out what exactly the truth of the situation is without revealing too much about what they've been working on with Margaret, since they go to like these alternating days and they can't talk to each other about what they talk to Margaret about. I definitely found Margaret's backstory very interesting. She kind of started not talking about herself but talking about the history of her family, and I've always found it like super fascinating to think about like the history of like generations of a family, and then also just kind of like how sort of like generational problems like reproduce themselves. And then also just like seeing how people acted in Margaret's family was kind of crazy. The very start of her family story was, I think it was like her great-grandfather buying out a newspaper when he found out the newspaper was going to write something negative about him. And it wasn't even to get rid of the story, it was just because he saw the power that a newspaper could have and he saw money in it. The actual romance portion, I feel like there could have been probably more time spent on that in retrospect, but in the moment while I was reading, I wasn't too disappointed by it. They're definitely cute together, or they kind of have the whole opposing personalities thing going on because Alice is very bubbly and Hayden is a bit more reserved. It was definitely a lot of interesting dynamics going on in the book. However, there was a twist towards the end where I was kind of like, that came out of nowhere. I kind of wish there was more time spent on that. And I kind of wonder if that twist was even necessary in the first place. But apart from that, I didn't really have any major issues with the book, and I enjoyed it a lot. And then moving on to part 2 of the Emily Henry double feature, we have People We Meet on Vacation. And like I said, I was waiting for it at the library, but I wasn't going to get it in time for the movie to come out in January. So one of my family members actually bought me the book. It's very pretty. This is the movie edition. And then they also like did sprayed edges. I know there's like a huge thing right now. It's like really nice to look at. But yeah, so basically the plot of this is that Poppy and Alex became friends in college. They are polar opposites, but they befriended each other on a drive home from college to their hometown, Linfield, Ohio. And essentially they decide to go on annual vacations together to sort of see the world, spend time with each other, etc. It's essentially kind of a homage to When Harry Met Sally. I think I like the relationship in this book more than Great Big Beautiful Life. Like, I think we got a little bit more time to sit in the relationship and see why Alex and Poppy really cared for each other. I also think their characters are a bit more developed, and that was something I really struggled with the movie, because I really don't think the characters got the same sort of time to grow in the movie compared to the book. Like, I know we're working with a 2-hour time frame, but one important note about this book is that there's kind of dual timelines. Like, it jumps back and forth between the present and the past. So we see Alex and Poppy's past vacations as well as the current vacation they're on, which is for Alex's brother's wedding. The movie also does the dual timelines, but I feel like we don't spend enough time in the present day. So it's like there's not enough time to kind of like overcome the issues that Alex and Poppy have. And then also Alex in particular, his character loses a lot of the depth that he had in the book, which this is the second time this has happened to Tom Blythe, because in the Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, people could not hear President Snow's thoughts, and that really impacted how people viewed his character in that movie. And in People We Meet on Vacation, a lot of Alex's interiority gets lost, which is not great, because there were people online saying that Tom Blythe was miscast or Alex was so boring, and I'm just like, guys are missing the point. But anyway, I really enjoyed this a lot. I think Alex and Poppy are just so compelling individually, and I think that makes their relationship a lot stronger. Compared to Great Big Beautiful Life, Alice kind of has her own backstory in the book, but I feel like it explains some of her actions, but at the same time it does feel a little contrived. Like, I think it felt more natural in People We Meet on Vacation. But like that didn't really detract from Great Big Beautiful Life. It's just, in comparison, you really see the differences after you've read both of them. And then the next double feature is actually Rebecca Kuang. So I was really excited to read Catawba Seas, her novel that came out, I think, in August of 2025. But once again, I got stuck on the library waitlist. I was number 222. So in the meantime, I ended up reading Yellowface. Yellowface is about a white woman named June, or Juniper, and she's best friends with this Asian author named Athena. And Athena has had a lot of success in her life despite being relatively young. She's got a successful career, she has all these rave reviews, and essentially June is very jealous. And in the beginning of the book, Athena actually dies in a freak accident. And in the aftermath of this, June steals one of Athena's unfinished manuscripts and essentially rewrites it, finishes it, and tries to pass it off as her own story. And she takes on this new pseudonym, Juniper Song, to sort of like pass as Asian. She takes author photos that are meant to be like racially ambiguous. And it's this whole thing where essentially she is now sort of presenting herself as an expert on Chinese culture, even though she's not actually Chinese. And she never actually comes out and says that she's Asian or not, but she's still sort of operating in these spaces as if she is. And I think it's a really interesting commentary on like the publishing industry and how people pretend they want to uplift marginalized voices, but they don't actually want to do that. You see that a lot with Juniper's agency, the people on her team, people around her, as well as Juniper herself. She has like this outward persona that she's trying to portray as someone who really cares about history and about marginalized communities, when inside you are reading her thoughts because it's in first person, and you see that she really resents Athena, really resents the way that the industry sort of prioritizes marginalized authors, which it doesn't. And she's just a really fascinating character because you can see her sort of inch closer to realizing that she's in the wrong, but then she'll end up just doubling down again. And so I found that really compelling. And then more broadly, I kind of alluded to this, like with Juniper's team, Juniper herself, you kind of see that they're like bad actors in a way, but then you also see Athena herself, where she's kind of accused of doing some horrible things to June, and it sort of like raises this question of like cycles of harm, like how do we take accountability for ourselves and things we do to others? Does being treated badly mean that you can treat others badly? And so I think it's all super interesting. I think the whole thing is just kind of a train wreck, and it's fun to watch.
Katabasis.
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 By R.F. Kuang. The second book I read by R.F. Kuang was Katabasis, which is a dark academia novel about two grad students, Alice and Peter, so we have another Alice here, who descend into hell to rescue the soul of their advisor, Professor Grimes, because Alice accidentally killed Grimes in a magic spell gone wrong because they're grad students in magic. But it's actually revealed later on that Alice did not kill Grimes. Grimes stole one of Peter's pentagrams, which is what they do to like cast their spells, and the pentagram was not complete. So basically, Grimes screwed himself over. But anyway, that's pretty much on par with Grimes' character. He's not a great person, and you see in Alice's narration throughout the book that she's just putting up with him because she thinks she has to have a successful career. But then on top of that, there's a layer of I'm better than other people because I'm putting up with this mistreatment, which was a little grating as the novel went on. But anyway, it's sort of compared to Dante's Inferno, but it draws on both that and then also sort of other interpretations of hell, and all of those kind of approaches, interpretations are put into the story as things that the characters sort of in universe draw on to navigate their way through hell and find their advisor. I think the concept was really strong. I was definitely really interested in it, and I think the academia portion really was weaved in really well. There was also clearly intended to be a romance between Alice and Peter, but I really don't think it was developed well. It was sort of like hinted at, and there was some history between them that was touched on, but I don't think it really built up or got resolved. And spoiler alert, towards the end of the book, Peter actually straight up dies. Like, I thought it was a fluke at first, but then he didn't come back. He was like actually dead. And at the end of the story, Alice sort of performs this spell to bring him back to life. But the problem is the way that that spell worked, I feel like it shouldn't have worked based on what was established in the universe, because it was established that if your spirit sort of disappears in hell, then you can't come back. But then Alice performs this spell at the end to sort of reverse his Disney death, and then they go off into the sunset. But I really don't think their relationship was developed enough for them to just go off happily. And then also, I feel like he should not have been revived. But basically, up until that happened, I really thought Alice was going to have to go through hell and find her advisor alone. I thought that was something that was generally going to happen. I feel like the ending was just not what I anticipated, because I genuinely thought like there was a chance that they would not escape hell at all. So I feel like my problem is that I think the story sort of wrapped up a little too neatly for like the stakes that were sort of given to us at the beginning. But apart from that, I did really enjoy the concept. I did really enjoy the lore that Kuang developed in this universe. I don't know. I just feel like there was so many implications that weren't explored, but I had a lot of fun thinking about the implications. Also, one thing that comes up repeatedly throughout the book is that their advisor, Grimes, is just not a good person. It is explicitly stated that he committed sexual misconduct against students. I just feel like it wasn't really handled well. Like, part of it is Alice's narration, because Alice thinks she should be able to overcome anything, and so she sort of glosses over Grimes's misgivings because she thinks like I'm a good academic, I can handle it, I can just push through and get through it, which is pretty common in grad school. But I feel like there's a gap between like a character narrating something, but the book doesn't really see it as something to like treat seriously, versus like the book treats it seriously and it's just like the character's worldview, you know? And Alice is called out on her worldview more than once, because there's a conversation she has with a professor after, Grimes commits misconduct against Alice. Alice goes to a female professor who she had previously spoken sort of negatively about, sort of derided for her like feminism and things like that. And Alice goes to this professor, and the professor says, basically, what do you want me to do? The professor like brushed her off, because it's like, you brushed me off, you're not going to do anything about it, so it's like, why even ask me anything? I don't know. It's just, I don't know how to articulate this, because not every character needs to have a perfect worldview, but it's like something was missing they can't quite put my finger on there.
I realize my problem is a combination of Alice not really learning anything until the end, and also Grimes seeming more like a caricature than an actual character.
I think it ties back to sort of things being resolved a little too quickly or not being resolved as thoroughly. And so even though Katabasis was more in line with my like topic genre interests than Yellowface, I think Yellowface was probably executed a bit better.
Literally all the footage where I discussed this is gone, but I also talk about how we got one chapter from Peter's point of view and nothing else from his perspective. And also the fact that there was a set of antagonists that got a lot of build-up, but the final confrontation, not a lot happened with it. So I wish more happened with that.
Moving on to our next book, we have The Princess Bride by William Goldman. I checked that out from the library. I've seen the movie, of course, and I wanted to read the actual book. And I thought it was really fun. A lot of it is pretty similar to the movie itself, but it's also just really long. The sort of metafiction style is really interesting, where you sort of see Goldman's annotations in the margins of the book. It's also associated with this idea that Goldman used to tell this story to his son, and then he realized that the book had a lot of like superfluous details, so he needed to like rewrite it and things like that. But of course, like his son and the backstory are all fictional. So I think that was a really interesting concept. Sometimes I feel like it added to the narration. Other times I feel like it over explained things that I could already sort of surmise from what was written in the actual fiction. So that's that. And then of course, like the actual story, I already liked the story, you know, like Buttercup is a girl who grew up on a farm. They had a farmhand named Wesley. They fall in love, etc., etc. Wesley leaves for America to get money. He dies at sea, which he died, but he became the Dread Pirate Roberts. Of course, most people know the story if they've seen the movie. I think it was really interesting to see sort of like what wasn't portrayed in the movie, because of course like the movie can't fit in every single detail. But yeah, I think it was definitely both a fun read but also a super interesting read just because of the way that the book was formatted. Moving on to my next book, I read Rebecca Not Becky, which is written by two authors, and it's sort of this dual narrative also about a white suburban mom and a black mom who moves to this predominantly white suburban neighborhood because her mother-in-law had to be put in I believe, a dementia facility. And it's sort of meant to be a commentary on racism and sort of similar to Yellowface, the idea that people think they're more progressive than they actually are, or they're trying to like put on this front when their reality doesn't reflect that. And I think the concept itself was interesting, and there were elements of the book that were executed better than others. Like there's intended to be this juxtaposition between DeAndrea, which is the black mom, and Rebecca, which is the white mom. And it's supposed to show that they're both sort of dealing with the sort of like wealthy suburban mom issues where it's like they're carrying most of the mental load, the household load, the emotional labor that their husbands aren't carrying. Like Rebecca definitely has some resentment towards her husband for not dealing with everything with their daughters. And of course, Deandra has some resentment for her like figuring out the stuff for her mother-in-law and then also their daughter. And then on top of that, Deandra and Rebecca are now moms at the same school because their children are both at the same school, and Rebecca sees Deandra's arrival as an opportunity to sort of like have a black friend and bring more diversity into the school environment. The novel tries to sort of like highlight their differences but also their similarities, but I think it wasn't executed in the best way. For one, I found both characters kind of irritating. Like just the narration, it was just a lot of like dropping name brands and like talking about Instagram all the time and just a lot of like keeping up with the Joneses, and it's just like kind of repetitive in a way that didn't really drive the story forward. Towards the end of the book, there's a new conflict introduced that isn't really handled well either. Like, not enough time is given to it, and not enough time given to the implications. And so it was a little rough to get through. And ironically, at the beginning, I was like questioning myself. I'm like, am I the problem? I thought I was in the wrong for like not enjoying like the characters' dialogue. I'm just like, maybe I'm not giving it a chance. But it's like everything was just like so like stereotypical and weird. Like there was a point where like Deandra's talking of her friends, and of course they're talking about the whiteness of the area they're in and not seeing a lot of people of color. And there's one point where I think it was one of Deandra's friends where she says like, oh, I saw this black child at the mall and she was so chocolatey and yummy, and like, please don't talk about a child like that. It was just very off-putting. I had a rough time with that book. And the last book is The Mother by Yvette Edwards. This is essentially about a court case where one teenager stabbed another over a girl, essentially. And the book is written from the perspective of the boy who died's mother, and sort of her perspective on the court case and grief and losing her son. And I wanted to compare this to Rebecca Not Becky because I was sort of went with the assumption that it would be sort of like similar in terms of like comparing the perspectives of two mothers in different situations. And I really did think the book was going that way because the mother, the narrator, Marcia, she talks a lot about the mother of the boy who killed her son, Miss Manley. And it really seemed like there was going to be a juxtaposition between them, between Marcia having all of these feelings, expressing these feelings outwardly, and Miss Manley being more stoic to the point where she thought Miss Manley didn't even care about what her son had done. But we really didn't get much introspection into Miss Manley's head. There were just like sort of minimal direct interactions between the two, which I was a little disappointed by. But at the same time, I think maybe that was kind of the point. Like when you're in a court case, you don't necessarily get to talk to like the family members of people involved unless they really like make an effort to. So maybe that distance was intentional, but that was an expectation that wasn't met. However, Marcia's son Ryan was dating this girl Sweetie, and Sweetie was also with the other boy Tyson, which Tyson's who stabbed Ryan. And it's actually revealed towards the end that Sweetie was pregnant and gave birth to a child. So in a way, Sweetie is a mother. And there's a lot more interaction between Sweetie and Marcia. So it's like, okay, maybe a juxtaposition is between Marcia as a mother and also Sweetie as a mother. A recurring theme is Marcia sort of coming down from her bubble of like privilege and sort of her worldview, and sort of understanding that people like Sweetie and Tyson are dealing with more struggles that she's not familiar with. Like, for example, like Tyson's older brother Vito was murdered as well, and Sweetie had dealt with violence, and her mother was out of the picture in prison and also in rehab, things like that. And so they're dealing with a lot of like personal challenges, societal challenges, things like that. And that's not something that's familiar to Marcia. And so she really had to learn over the course of the book that these people are going through things that I can never understand. And she even has a whole section where it's like, oh, you know, I send all this money overseas, I help the less fortunate, and yeah, I'm not even thinking about the people down the road. And so that, I thought that was really interesting. I also thought the grief narrative was handled really well, especially because Marcia and her husband, Lloydie, they both dealt with Ryan's death very seriously. Like, Marcia's always showing up, she's going to the court case. Meanwhile, Lloydie was avoiding the court case, avoiding Marcia, avoiding everything. And it just showed how two different people could handle grief in the same way. And it also reminded me of the statistic that a lot of couples split up after the death of a child just because of how fraught that situation is. And so, yeah, I enjoyed this a lot. I do wish it was a bit longer because it had the problem where it's like, not that things are resolved too quickly, even though some things were, like, they came across as more dramatic than would be sort of realistic in this type of book. But I think it just kind of like ended without resolving it. Like, we don't know if Tyson was declared guilty or not. It just kind of ends sort of towards the end of the court case without actually giving a resolution. And I mean, I guess life doesn't really work that way, but this is like a fairly short book to begin with. It was only 238 pages. So I think maybe there could have been a little bit more time spent on that. But anyway, those are the books I read recently. Definitely let me know in the comments if you've read any of these and what your thoughts are, and also give me other book recommendations in the comments. And if you enjoyed this video, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and I will see you all next time.